Bruce McPherson has some words to welcome us, and he's representing both the 5th District and the 3rd District tonight. So thank you, Supervisor McPherson.
Thank you, Pia, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. To update the community on the county's fire recovery efforts, I'm 5th District Supervisor Bruce McPherson. Tonight, we're going to hear about a range of topics, including the Recovery Permit Center, temporary occupancy permits, and resources available to EZU survivors. But we're also here to hear from you and what's working in the recovery and building process, as well as what could be improved and what needs to you may are not being met yet. For the most part, recovering from a catastrophic fire is new to all of us. Our survivors, our county government, our friends in the nonprofit business and business sectors, but we will continue to work together in good faith. And I think that we will succeed and be on better footing in the very near future. While we're living in the same county, those who are rebuilding here will not all have the same circumstances. For some, it will be a smooth process, and for others, the road will be more challenging for reasons we explore tonight. But I want to pledge to you that my office and the office of my fellow supervisors, Ryan Coonerty, who could not be here tonight, is dedicated to helping each and every survivor to the greatest extent to our ability. I want to thank the survivors who have brought their concerns to my attention, and we've been willing and who have been willing to work with our staff to address them. I really want to thank all the dedicated county staff. This is all new to them, and the resource providers who we will hear from tonight. And after some brief updates, we will have a time for questions and answers with them. And I think tonight, Dave Reed, the analyst for the Office of Response, Recovery, and Resilience, which was established after the fire, will be the next to make a presentation. So I would like to introduce you to Dave Reed, our analyst in the Office of, you'll hear it, OR3, Office of Response, Recovery, and Resilience. Dave, please go ahead.
Thanks, Supervisor McPherson. I just wanted to quickly go over this evening's meeting protocols. As you may have noticed, just before Supervisor McPherson started speaking, we did begin recording. That way we can preserve this meeting and put it up on our OR3 website for those folks who are unable to attend. We did ask at the beginning, and I will try my best to keep everybody muted during the presentation, and please hold your questions until afterward. That way we can try and get through the presentation, hopefully answering as many of those questions as we go along. And then at the end, we'll have a chance to ask questions. For those using Zoom, I'm sure you're all familiar. We're going to try and use the raise hand function. So if you hover below, you should be able to see where you can raise your hand. If there are any questions on that, please let me know. We'll do our best to make sure to answer questions as they come. And then please be respectful. If somebody is asking a question, we want to try and allow that person to ask without being interrupted. And then what we do want is to try and ask one question at a time and make sure that we can get through everybody who has questions before we go back to somebody to ask a second question. After the meeting, there's additional resources there at the bottom of the page where you can email the RPC or call the Recovery Permit Center if you have additional questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to our Assistant Planning Director, Pia Levine.
Thank you, David. So as David said, my name is Pia Levine. I'm the Assistant Director of the Planning Department. I'll introduce the rest of the team in a moment. First, just again, the purpose of the meeting is to introduce the Recovery Permit Center, and the services that you'll find there will give you an overview of the permit process and basically refresh everyone, because the Recovery Permit Center has been operating since the beginning of December, and they have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fire survivors at this point. So they're in action and operating. We'll also introduce the long-term recovery group, which is an umbrella group of nonprofits and service agencies that will talk about the services that they have on offer. The team tonight for the Recovery Permit Center is Mike Renner and Marcus Johnson. We have Carolyn Burke representing the Planning Department. Carolyn is our senior civil engineer, and she's a resource if questions come up that are technical or geotechnical in nature. We have Dr. Marilyn Underwood. Dr. Underwood is the director of the Environmental Health Services Department. She is a resource for all things septic and water supply related. And then we have David Reed, who you've already heard from the Office of Recovery, Resiliency, and Response, OR3. And then last but not least, there are two representatives from the Long-Term Recovery Group. And those folks are Amy Bach and Valerie Brown. They're representing the recovery group as well as United policyholders. So that's the team, that's the agenda. We'll be back to take questions at the end, and I think I will hand it off to Marcus Johnson.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for spending a little bit of time this evening with us, getting out this information to all. I'm Marcus Johnson. I'm the Director of Operations in the Recovery Permit Center. On this slide, we have where we're located, 701 Ocean Street, downstairs in the basement in the community room. We are by appointment currently. We're open from 8 to 12, closed for lunch between 12 and 1, and then open back again from 1 to 5. When you do make appointments, we do have availability for in-person and also digital. Next slide, please.
Yes, yeah.
Second, Burke.
So the primary contact information, that's me and Mike Renner's cell phone number. Mike Renner is also the executive project manager, and both of us cell phone numbers on 24/7, email address goes directly to our phone. Any type of questions, anything, just reach out to us. We can sort anything out, figure something out, or if something doesn't sit right with you in the middle of the night, just give us a call or an email. We'll help you. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over the basic steps from kind of start to building permit issuance. Obviously, the first step is your pre-application meeting. Then you go into your pre-clearances. From there, your permit submittals, and that could be building submittals, environmental health, grading, geology, and then to the issuance and actual inspections and rebuild of your rebuild. Next slide, please. So kind of the first topic we have going tonight is temporary housing. So the temporary housing is for RVs, temporary structures are allowed in affected properties, and also within the fire area and also outside the fire area. Within the time we've been here, we've noticed we haven't really seen too many people take advantage of the outside and inside of the property burn area. But there is that opportunity to apply for the building or for that temporary housing permit. With that application is health and safety clearances, so basic sewage disposal, potable water, and geological hazards are evaluated through this temporary pre-application meeting. If you've already applied for your temporary housing and further geological investigation was required, there is an avenue for limited temporary housing permits. If you reach out to me directly, we can go over your specific situation and see if we can, if that would be a fit for you moving forward. Next slide. So the pre-application screening is your first step in your road to recovery. It is kind of a spitball session, more of just being able to talk to somebody, kind of seeing what's available for your property. There's nothing needed on our end, just your address or an APN so we can find the parcel, and then just kind of from there we're going through all of the different avenues on your property. So we'll pull up the different GIS layers, the different municipal codes, coastal permit zones. We'll pull up your permit history. Just kind of pull a complete information check of the property and really just kind of talk it out and see what you're interested in doing. If you want to do a bigger house, smaller house, you want to move it, just kind of anything that's on your mind regarding the rebuild submittals or anything like that. It really helps kind of define what your next steps would be. But it's a very simple way to just get out and understand what's available to your property, and what roads or avenues it would take to get there for what you propose on ultimately building. Next slide. So after you've gone through the pre-application screening and we've kind of, you kind of locked in a more conceptual aspect of what you actually want to rebuild, the next portion is the pre-application clearance process, which that consists of is environmental health review, a geological hazard, and fire assessment. Basically, this puts into conception what you're proposing for your rebuild. By no means this will lock you in on a specific type of rebuild. We can always alter, change, but this will give you a roadmap for you and your designers to kind of work towards the next steps, the next permits, and also gives us a clearer and easier path for when you get to building permits. It helps expedite that process. So stuff that can run simultaneously versus things that maybe need to be done a little bit ahead of time. That kind of helps sort that whole permit processing and what permits are required. Next slide, please. One of the key aspects of the pre-clearances is a pre-clearance site plan. It's a little different as far as we're merging multiple departments' requirements into one site plan. Below is a link to the entire list of what's required. That's about 24 items that kind of cross over the 3 different clearance departments. With that, you'll see we'll help you with any portions of that particular site plan. If you need information, how to get that particular information, why it's useful, why we would need it. Next slide, please. This first example is one example of a site plan that goes. This is off of a website that you put in your information and it helps you produce it. There's also design professionals, but just an example of kind of what we're looking for, where the building is, coordinates for where the building is, where the previous structures were, septic, wells, where the access came in, property boundaries, that type of information. Also with, next slide. This is also, so we have many people designing their own site plans. And like I said before, we can help you go through that particular process, find this particular information. I know it'll ask for information as far as contours, coordinates for where the buildings are at. And we can help you use the county tools, GIS mapping layers to produce all this information, just help you put it all together. We also contact us, come in, can't see you enough, we can help make sure that it has everything complete for that submittal. Also, Credence Shaw with the Santa Cruz County Recovery Foundation will also have information for different websites that will help with that, help with the producing site plans. We'll get his information in the comments. But yeah, just reach out to him, and they do have some features that are regards to helping out with creating and producing these site plans. Next slide, please. So one of the pre-clearances is geological. Basically, the area where the fire occurred is a pretty complex area geologically. Different soils profiles, slopes, landslides, and other hazards on top of creating a new hazard with the debris flow. So that pre-application goes through that information or to determine if there's additional information that would be required to locate your home in a specific safe location. The geological clearance is in kind. Usually your easiest path to where you're going. Also, if there was any additional geological clearance are to be done by staff at no cost. So this particular clearance doesn't cost anything. If there was to be requirements for maybe a further investigation or geological study, geological hazards assessment, they have reduced the fees, and it's $1,194 if we were to have to go down that path. Next slide, please. So one thing that's been produced, and we've been kind of with the community outreach and just seeing where people are kind of at going through the process. The Santa Cruz County Community Foundation has funded a additional study for debris flows and flood hazard studies. This study is already started. We expect it to be done mid-September. This particular study would apply to all the residences that are in the debris flow area. Basically, this study will help define the debris flow areas and the debris flow hazards. It'll produce modeling for design criteria for the debris flow area. We're hoping that this will help with the design community and maybe lessen the blow of the front end geological study. With that, we also kind of want to encourage people that maybe have a little bit of time to wait to see the result of this study. It will define the debris flow areas and the debris flow chutes, and hopefully maybe remove some of the residences out of the debris flow hazards. Next slide. The second pre-clearance that goes through is environmental health. So this is for septic systems, potable water. This is verify permits for septic system and water sources. So what we're doing is determining the size of the permitted versus your proposed septic system and what would be required to possibly add capacity, add a bedroom, add an ADU to that particular property. We're also vetting properties along Highway 236. There is a proposal to extend the sewer. So when we do go through these pre-clearances, we will be giving further information to those particular properties that would be affected by that and some of the options regarding possibly extending the sewer lines. Next slide. One of the big things we're seeing currently is obviously people want to add ADUs, maximize their property. So part of that is knowing kind of what the requirements are. So one thing is each particular building would have to have a 1,500 gallon tank. The ADU leaching is calculated by bedrooms, plus the additional load of a kitchen and a laundry. For properties larger than 2 acres, they do have the ability to use 2 separate freestanding septic systems. For properties smaller than 2 acres, there's a single system that must accommodate both the house and the ADUs. With that, you would have to have 100% expansion of that larger system. Next slide. One of the things that has been a little different is that we're allowing ADUs first that normally wasn't allowed prior to the fire. With this, we've been seeing people doing a phased approach, which shows possibly the ADU going in first to be built at a quicker time, and then you would basically be showing your location of your house, where your proposed house is, where your ADU is, and then the location of where that proposed septic system would be. that you basically have enough space to achieve that larger system. With that, you have the ability to connect to your existing septic system for what was the main house or the larger house. And then in phase 2, when you decided to build the second structure, that's when the either second septic system would be installed or the larger system would be installed. Building the main home, and then the ADU falls under the same normal policies it was on the slide before regarding 1 and 2 acre parcel sizes. Next slide. And one of the final pre-clearances is fire access. So we will set up a inspection for one of the retired fire chiefs to go out and view the fire access to the house. This also includes roads, access, water storage, defensible space around the structures. That will also produce a recommendation for what meets code or what meets the standard, what doesn't, and that'll be also produced onto your as far as one of your pre-clearances. Next slide, please. Coastal zones. So here's the kind of a depiction of where all the affected structures are and the coastal zone. Next slide.
I can
So
take these slides, Marcus, if that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, so that last slide just showed which portion of the burn area is in the coastal zone. And you can see it's much of the north coast, everybody on the coast side of Empire Grade until about Smith Grade. And then it gets a little bit narrower, but it still includes all of Swanton, Last Chance, etc. So if you're in that area, you do need a coastal permit. That's a state regulation. The county doesn't control that. We actually don't have that much say over how that process goes, except that we will work with you to use all of the exemptions and the other ways to minimize the difficulty to the extent there is any. We'll do that with you. There is a disaster exemption, and if your project is generally in kind, meaning it's for the same use, obviously a home in the same location and within 10% of the size of your previous home, and you had a permit, then you will likely fit into the disaster exemption and will not have to get that coastal permit. So our best advice to you, if you're in the coastal zone, is to make sure you connect with the Recovery Permit Center and have them talk with you about what's the best path forward for you. The cost of the permit varies and it adds some time that we also have no control over. There are state mandated timelines. So we'll get you through the coastal permit process, but do be aware you have that step if you're in the coastal zone. Next slide, please. And there are a couple of systems we were able to set up to lessen the burden of the coastal permit process. And that is if you're building a new ADU, we've negotiated to process it at a lower level, meaning you don't have a public hearing. And then if your project, if we can argue that it won't have any impacts, we can likely process it as a minor project, which is also a way to get a shorter timeline. And we did a master permit for all temporary homes that are in the coastal zone. So those don't need separate coastal permits. So we're working it wherever there's space to do that. And really the best thing to do is start talking to the Recovery Permit Center. Next slide. Back to Marcus.
So after we've gone through all the pre-screening and the pre-application, and the pre-application put out some information of maybe we wanted to go with a larger house and we have a few environmental health permits to achieve. We get to the point where we're at the building permit application. With that, some of the requirements may run simultaneously, some might have to be done prior, but in all, you can get that process started. When you do submit your applications, we're looking about a 5 to 10 day turnaround time for the building plan submittals iterations. And we also have a green line procedure and process to help expedite that, where if there's minor comments, things that that code wise, it's more black and white. It says thou shalt have this or that. We'll just annotate the plans instead of having back and forth iterations. Next slide, please. Part of the application, we have on the first slide, the time tap. You go on there, it'd be building project submittal. With that, there is another complete application form, has all the applications information of how to submit. With that, a Dropbox will be sent to the applicant. The applicant will have multiple files to attach to plans, attachments, calculations, etc. With that, we'll vet that with you in the application to make sure it's a complete submittal. We do recommend if you do have, let's say, a house, a detached ADU, and let's say a detached garage, to possibly separate those plans for iteration and review. It helps with us maybe being able to approve the house versus maybe there's a correction on the ADU, so you're not being held up for a small corrections on one when the other two are okay. So that's just kind of a recommendation we're putting out there. Next slide, please. As far as after you get past the approval, get to the approval process, you'll either have a hard set of plans that you'll keep on site for inspections, or we will digitally stamp the digital copies of the plans and attachments. We would like for you guys to print out a copy for the inspector on site. We know that internet is a little sketchy in some areas, so it's just easier to have a hard copy at that point. As far as inspections, will all be done through the Recovery Permit Center. And right now we're looking at next working day. We're possibly looking when the flow gets up to maybe add weekend inspections if needed for critical path inspections. Next slide, please. So I'm going to put it over to the long-term recovery group.
Thanks, Marcus. We're going to have Valerie Brown, our chair of the long-term recovery group, talk a little bit about the long-term recovery group.
Well, Dave, thank you for having me today. Let me pull up my screen. So my name is Valerie Brown. As Dave said, I am the chair of the Santa Cruz Long-Term Recovery Group. And actually, Dave, you've got it up there, don't you? Never mind. Just saw that you had the slide deck up there. So the Long-Term Recovery Group was founded after the fires, and our goal is to put together a collaboration that will partner with CZU fire families on your trip on this long-term recovery journey. Next slide, please. So this is our mission, really simple. We're a collaboration of nonprofits, faith-based, local, state, national organizations. The ideas we're working together to share information or resources that can help address individual community needs in the end result to develop a healthy and thriving region through these processes. And as you see on the screen, if you need assistance in recovering from the fire, please email or call this number to connect with a disaster case manager. If you, in the email, please provide your name, your disaster impacted address, and the best way for us to reach you. Next slide, please. I just wanted to identify here who our collaboration partners are. This is not a complete list, but you can see we're running the gauntlet from nonprofits to governmental entities. And we're all here to work together to make things better for you. Next slide. And this is roughly how to access our resources and assistance. So as I shared before, you have the email and the phone number. We will do a brief intake with you. Disaster case management will connect you to other resources. And if your needs are severe, we have an unmet needs committee that will be helping help people become whole and return to the community. Before we skip the slide, just on the last paragraph there, I want to point out the 211 Santa Cruz County has a updated list of resources that they maintain. And please check this out for anything you're looking for. And next slide, I think there might be one more. Yes, and so this is the calendar for this month currently. So you can see, we've got our fire recovery resource partners here, our July events, crisis support resources, and different ways to access support. So I want to thank you for having us today, and I want to make the make sure that any survivor in the room knows that if you've got a need, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll be able to plug you into our partnership to see what we can do to support you. And that would be it, I believe, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks. And now I'm going to hand it off actually to Amy from United Policyholders. I think I'm going to stop share and she's going to share her screen. Amy, is that right? Let me see. There we go.
And Amy, if you will unmute.
There we go. Better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Good evening, and thank you, Dave, and for including us in this program. To those of you who've tuned in, our hearts are with you and our minds. So you heard from Val and you saw the helpful list that she shared of upcoming events. United Policyholders, if you haven't heard of us, we are a 501c3, a nonprofit, a charity with a very unique specialty of supporting people after disasters in keeping forward momentum on the challenging road to recovery, and specifically making good decisions about insurance, rebuilding, and just staying supported. So this is a snapshot of our library that we have set up for people who lost their homes in the 2020 wildfires in California. You can see that we have an upcoming event this Thursday. We will have somebody from the California Department of Insurance with us, as well as myself. And I'm an attorney and a co-founder of the organization. So, we kind of started, our organization started in the aftermath of the Loma Prieta earthquake that hit your community. So we have a lot of love for your community and a lot of energy that we are putting into supporting your recovery. And we hope that you're all accessing either the website, library, the events, the survivor to survivor forums that we have. There's one coming up on July 20th. That is an opportunity for you to go be online with other people in your situation, as well as people who have traveled the road you're traveling and came out on the other side and are now paying forward some of the help they got to help you. So it's a little more informal than, say, one of our workshops where we have lawyers answering questions or claim professionals. So I encourage you to take advantage of these free services. It's really our honor and privilege to work in this community. And I know with some of the questions you may have about your insurance and debris removal, we're here to answer them. So unless there are any specific questions, just a reminder that all our services are free, and that the best way to reach us is info@uphelp.org if you don't find what you need in one of our programs or on our website. And just to reiterate Val's suggestion that if you didn't know there was such a thing as a disaster case manager, they're there. They are now available to you, and they can be very helpful in helping you identify solutions to problems that may be tripping you up on your road to recovery. So we're rooting for you, and thank you for including us in tonight's program.
Thanks, Amy. At this point, that's the end of our kind of talking program. I thank you all for being patient while we went through that information. I know for some of you, it may be information you already were aware of, but we wanted to try and reiterate some content that was presented earlier in the year and late last year for those folks at a different stage of the recovery process. So at this point, what we'd like to do is answer questions to the best of our ability. And so for folks, if you don't mind, you use the raise hand function at the bottom. Under the reactions, you can click on raise your hand, and we'll try and go through in order as best we can. And by way of starting, Antonia Bradford, why don't you please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So my question, and I asked Dave this question already, but I'm just going to ask it anyways, so everyone can hear it. I've got a question about geology and the implementation of the debris flow study into our geotech reports and how that could potentially change the kind of foundation we have and all these other aspects of our build. And my big question is how come a temporary situation where the risk mitigates over time is going to influence our permanent structure? And my big concern obviously is that it's going to elevate the cost of our construction because foundation modifications are expensive. And if the county is really hard line that we must include this information for this temporary issue into our permanent structures, is there any way that any cost that it increases in our build, you guys deduct from our permit fees?
So I think Carolyn Burke from our environmental planning division in planning is going to try and answer some of those questions for you, Antonia.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So that is very true, Antonia. When we're mitigating for geologic hazards, it will have impacts on the design of your structure. And it could be, in the case of a debris flow, something that would be incorporated into the foundation design as you're stating, or it may be a mitigation that would be a structure that would be separate from your building, an impact wall or a deflection wall or something of that nature. And it is an unfortunate circumstance to have to deal with that. And not only is there the temporary elevated debris flow risk, but as we've discussed in previous forums, there's a historical risk of debris flows that predated the fire, but it has amplified the magnitude of it over the next 5 years or so. So I can't speak to the fee portion, but there would be some aspects of your design that will be impacted by that. I'm not sure if there's something more specific you'd like to request. Like I said, I can't really speak to the fee portion. That's out of my hands, but yes, there will be impacts to the design.
So just a quick follow-up question then. So then really, and again, I keep kind of butting heads with you guys around this, around looking at our parcels as undeveloped parcels. And, for me, okay, I understand the debris flow risk as from the fire, but now you're talking about pre-fire stuff, and the slope behind my house and the drainage behind my house was there when my house was built with permits. I find it a bit unconscionable that you guys would not grandfather us in at those building codes, because when I bought my home, that slope was there. When I bought my home, that whatever mudslide you guys talking about from 100 years ago, like that had happened, and that risk was there already. So I just don't think it's fair that you guys do that to us, especially because it exponentially increases the cost of our builds. And I know that the county knows that. So I don't understand why there's not a workaround in progress to try to get us to a point where it makes rebuilding accessible. Because when you talk about these mitigation factors, as you know, they can be so expensive, and we're all underinsured. And it makes it so that many of us, that'll make it cost prohibitive for us to build. And for me, I've already spent tens of thousands of dollars to get to this point. And so I just find it very frustrating.
Thanks, Antonia. I definitely, I think we all appreciate that. I think we want to make sure we try and get through a few more questions. And then I think if we have the time, we can definitely circle back and talk a little bit more about this issue. There may be other questions about it as well, but thank you. Carrie, I know you had your hand raised next. Carrie Fenstra.
Thank you. Let's see, I experienced a total loss, and I'll be replacing a 3-bedroom house with a 3-bedroom house. I know that a junior ADU is not considered a new construction. It's I forgot what you call it. It's like a remodel or something. Is there anything that I need to consider with the fact that one of the bedrooms will be having an outside access door and maybe a bit larger and so on to make it easier to rent out?
I don't know, Paya. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. The kind of ADU that is in that category in the regular permit world is, we call it a conversion, where existing space is being dedicated to being used as an ADU. And there are details about whether there's a door to the outside or not, and there's a size restriction and some other things. So I'm going to ask if you can ask that question of the RPC. There's, you know, the main constraint for parcels so far has been the overall septic load that an ADU contributes, where septic resources are constrained. But if that's not an issue for you because you're going from 3-bedroom to 3-bedroom, that's a good thing, because that kind of ADU does not have a separate complete kitchen. So I don't know the specific zoning related answer offhand, but definitely ask the RPC and we can figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Paya. Thanks, Carrie. If you still have a question, you can certainly keep your hand raised. Once you've asked your question, if you wouldn't mind lowering it, that would be helpful. I just have Jessica, no last name, but Jessica next on my list with a question hand raised.
Hi there, thank you. I actually have a few questions that I think are fairly short answers. The first one is, as the geo reports are being done over the next 8 to 10 weeks, will properties be notified as their properties are complete, or is everyone to be done?
Jessica, I mean, I don't know if somebody else.
Sorry, someone else.
Michael Renner needs to mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just did that.
Okay, sorry. So my question is, as the geo reports are being done over the next 8 to 10 weeks, will properties be notified as theirs are done, or is everyone waiting for everyone to be done?
Are you speaking about the debris flow and flood hazard study?
Yes, sorry,
oh,
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that study is a model of the whole burn area. And so the results are going to be produced all at one time, and it should result in a map that would provide the limits of the potential debris flow runout areas, and then risk levels for high, medium, and low risk areas. And so it is a regional model, and it would cover the entire area at one time.
Okay. And then my other question is, on one of the first few slides, they were talking about the fee of $1,100 and $1,194. If there's additional geo that has to happen, and maybe I'm not asking this question quite correctly because I don't know all the correct verbiage. But what would constitute as like additional geo, like what Antonia was speaking of with the big slope behind her house? Is that considered like additional geo?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. And yeah, we can clarify that. So what it is when you get your geologic hazard clearance, it will indicate if there's any additional geologic investigation that's necessary. And that may be a geologic hazard assessment, which is a summary of the constraints on your property, the geologic hazards that may impact your property, and then a statement as to whether further geologic investigation would be required, which would be a geologic report. So there's a geologic hazard assessment is a summary of the constraints, and a geologic report is something that is a report that you engage a private consulting geologist to perform that report. And so typically for a geologic hazard assessment, you can either get a private geologic hazard or a private geologist to perform that, or you can go through the County of Santa Cruz, and we have either our county geologist or consulting geologists that we've contracted will come out and do the geologic hazard assessment. And so that is the $1,194 fee that you see there. And then any further, if you had to, let's say, do a geologic report, if we needed to review that report, it would be at no additional cost. So that's where that difference is. And when, as far as knowing whether you need additional geology on your property, as you were speaking, you know, to look at a slope or something like that. And I apologize, Jessica, I'm not sure where you are, if you're in a debris flow hazard area or not. But that would be a geologic report that you would be getting, and that would be indicated on the Geological Hazard Clearance, which is the pre-application clearance for geologic hazards. I know I used geologic a lot of times in the last couple minutes, so please feel free to ask any clarifying questions.
Yeah, so we are in a debris flow. We're in Forest Springs, and we're one of the folks that had a total loss in the Acorns. And that kind of leads me to a follow-up question on what you're talking about is one property above us backs up to Big Basin Water Company's land, and there's nothing above that all the way up to Empire Grade, minus like a few sporadic houses up the hillside. Much of their land burned. Obviously, there's nothing we can do to mitigate their land, and rumor has it is they're going out of business. So if the county comes in and says Big Basin Water Company's land is at risk, how does that impact us? Because we have zero control over that.
Yeah, unfortunately, when we're looking at mitigating geologic hazards, when the only way that we can look at protecting the property is when the property is built. So it's just looking at whatever is going to come down from the property or above you, and then the mitigation is going to be the design of your home to either avoid or protect the occupants from impact. Unfortunately, we don't go back to the property owner and have them mitigate it. It actually needs to be incorporated into the design. And so that's not only for, you know, county and local codes, but also California State Building Code does have requirements for design to mitigate geologic hazards as well.
Sure, but that kind of goes into what Antonio was talking about, which is that all of that was there pre-fire, and the house was built, and it was all there before we bought.
Jessica,
So,
yeah, Jessica, these are great questions. Let me try and get to a few more.
Sorry, I don't want to take up everyone else's stuff.
I think we probably will end up circling back a little bit on some of these geotechnical and geologic questions, but I do want to make sure we try and get through everybody, and then we can circle back to that if you still have a question, or if Antonia has a follow-up question as well. Rima is the next person I have on my list with the hand raised.
Yes, hello. My name is Rima Farhat. I'm an architect speaking on behalf of a client rebuilding a home in the CZU area. Thank you for putting this on, by the way. I have actually two questions regarding the septic requirements for ADUs. My first question, and I know the other participant, Carrie Veenstra, already touched on this, is regarding requirements for septic systems for ADUs. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on when the second separate septic system would be required, whether it's an ADU, a junior ADU, or what would that requirement change if the ADU was attached versus detached?
Good question. I think Marilyn Underwood or Marcus. Yeah.
So kind of you count through three different scenarios out there. So let's say we're doing detached and ADU, detached structures. You'd have a phase. So first structure, that septic system would be counted when the before the building permits are issued for the second structure, either the ADU or the house, that's, we would have to have the design approved for that second system to be installed. And it wouldn't have to be, it'd have to be approved, but it doesn't have to be installed until final inspection of obviously your build. If it was an attached ADU, the system would have to be, either both systems would have to be in or accommodated for at issuance of that particular build.
Okay, so if it was an attached ADU, would you be able to have one septic system that can accommodate the ADU and the residents?
It would be a possibility, yes, if you wanted
Okay.
a large system.
However, if it was detached, it would not be possible?
Depends on the size of the property. If you're over 2 acres, you have the ability to do 2 separate systems. If you're less than 2 acres, it would have to be, you'd have 2 separate 1,500-gallon tanks and one large or one larger leach field.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Welcome.
And that actually segues into my second question, which is in regards to the rule about the 2 acres that you had mentioned earlier. In this case of the particular parcel that I'm working with, the parcel is about 2 acres. However, a large portion of the parcel is not buildable because of the slopes.
Mhm.
So how would you consider that type of scenario? I know there's a lot of parcels like that in this area.
So you would still go, the square footage of the parcel is the square footage of the parcel. If it's a 2-acre parcel, it's a 2-acre parcel regardless of the terrain. The terrain would more than likely factor on the type of system. Usually, if you don't have the ability to have 100% expansion on a normal leach line, soils conditions, or high groundwater, or just not enough physical space, then you'll start getting into the advanced treatment type systems, which those systems are a little bit more costly, but they do have the advantage of there's a lot less leaching required because of their pre-treatment and mechanism they use to clarify the water prior to getting into the going back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And then what's the logic of the 2-acre rule? But I don't understand the logic of just making a size, that would trigger this additional requirement. I feel like it's a little bit more nuanced than that on some of these parcels.
So the actual requirement is a 1 acre for a septic system, a standard system, and that's with the caveat of all the setbacks, from setbacks to home, setbacks to wells, creek setbacks, and a few other setbacks. A few other setbacks within the OTS manual, and that's where you kind of get that 1 acre with 1 acre for one single system, and then obviously for 2 houses or 2 units, you'd have to have. That's where you get the 2 acres is the setbacks between all of those components.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rima. Alid is the next hand I have raised.
Hi, it's Allie.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Allie D, sorry, gotcha.
That's okay. I'm going back to the pre-permitting process. And the issue I have with it is you guys have, there was never any letting us know that we needed the coastal permits first, which we probably should have done before we did the pre-permitting, because everything came back as you failed because you don't have the coastal permits. And then part 2 of that is the fire access and the road, which I'm not sure why that couldn't be done first without us having to pay for that.
Ali, maybe I'll have Paya answer that first coastal question, or Marcus, and then I might ask a clarifying on your fire access question.
Yeah, thanks, Ali. So I don't know if you're asserting that you had a pre-application screening and nobody discussed with you that you're in the coastal zone or not.
Correct.
Okay, well, we should be checking for that, and if you are in the coastal zone and we didn't discuss it with you, then that's, that's something we should have done that differently. So I'll apologize for that. However, I don't know that that has had any impact for this reason. We use the clearances in the coastal permit process. Both the clearances and the coastal permit need to be done, before there's an actual building permit application, and that's how it is really all of the time. You need to have your coastal permit first, and the clearances give us some of the answers we need to process your coastal permit. They tell us whether there are geologic issues. It tells us what your road access, does it comply? We use that information to make the findings that yes, we can issue a coastal permit. So it would have needed to happen regardless. And I don't think that you've probably lost any time. But what I would like to do is make sure we have an appointment with you. And by the way, we do these in person or remotely, to talk with you about the coastal side of things, because now that you have your clearances, well, we can talk about if you didn't get cleared on those three things, why not? And
Yeah.
then, how that impacts getting the coastal permit, because dealing with the coastal would be the next step.
Okay, so you're saying that we didn't need to have the coastal first before the pre-permitting?
No, those two things can be one before the other or simultaneous, the applications, but we need you to do both to get the coastal over the finish line.
Okay, all right, well then that's next. And then the 4-leaf guys will help me with getting that coastal set up?
Yeah, and Ally, if you want to just either say or email in the morning your parcel number, that way the RPC staff will know who you are, connect you to this conversation, when you contact them.
Well, they know who I am.
Oh, okay.
I've been and I've checked through it, but I never got you need to do the coastal permits until I didn't pass.
Okay. Yeah, as I said, I don't think it cost you anything, but we should be telling you that.
Okay, and then
picture at the earliest time.
The fire thing, I guess, my concern is that hopefully it's not happening to other communities, but I think that should have been just told to us that this isn't going to pass. So don't waste everyone's time.
Ally, where do you live? Or
Last chance.
Last chance. Yeah. So we are trying to work with the RPC, and myself are trying to work to address that issue in terms of having a conversation with CAL FIRE and our county fire marshals regarding that. So there's actually a meeting set up this week to discuss that with members of Last Chance, as well as the fire marshal and fire chief, to discuss what's going to be required for Last Chance folks regarding the fire clearance.
Okay.
I do want to add just one thing for everybody's sake around the coastal, that to try and reiterate what Paya mentioned. One of the first dozen homes that was permitted and received their building permit to begin construction was in the coastal zone. And it was actually off the very front part of Last Chance. So hopefully for most folks that are in the coastal zone, it's not a time-intensive or onerous process. But I just wanted to share that was one of the first dozen was actually in the coastal zones.
I also would just like to share that if you go to the recovery website, there is a link, a hot link, where you can go, you put in your parcel number, and it will return back whether you're in the coastal zone or not. So you'll know that if you want to ask that question on your own. You can do that anytime.
Thanks, Paya. Thanks, Ally. I'm gonna go on to James Pye.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify a point on so apparently we're in the coastal zone. We've already gotten our pre-clearance okays. And what I heard is if we're building an in-kind dwelling, then there's a disaster exemption and we should not worry about this, or will be automatically disposed of, or is there still some paperwork involved?
Yes, I can respond to that. We should be talking with you about the coastal process in order to confirm that the exception applies to you. There are some, and I think we had it mentioned on the slide, there's a caveat if you're within X feet of a wetland or drainage, certain things that can only be known about your parcel specifically. Certain circumstances kick you out of the exception. So we need to verify that the exception applies, and then we do some paperwork that basically issues you it's actually not an exception, it's an exemption. So we issue you a coastal exemption, and we have to go through that step. So we should do that for you and confirm that you're exempt.
Okay, yeah, and I think we won't have any of those complications. So it'll be your office that'll be.
It'll be the Recovery Permit Center.
Yes, okay, thanks a lot.
And they'll notify us when they're done.
Thanks, James. Our next, Christine.
Yeah, don't bother. So I have a couple of things. First of all, I'm happy to put things in chat, but you guys have chat disabled for some reason.
Yeah, I apologize. First and foremost, I apologize that our Zoom account, the county's Zoom account, is limited to 100 people. So I believe some of you may have received text from fellow survivors that they couldn't get on. That is totally my fault. I totally apologize. I didn't realize that. And then, yeah, the chat is disabled for this. For future meetings, I will fix those two things. So I really apologize, Christine and others.
Okay, so first of all, we have a lot of downed trees on our property, like a lot of other people. And we actually have somebody who's willing to mill the wood, but the state of California requires it to be graded. And I can tell you, there are no graders to be hired in the entire state of California. So the state is requiring something that can't be done. In past fires, the state has been willing to relax requirements. Now, I know other people that want to mill wood too. So maybe the planning department can get a grader online or relax the requirement or do something, because this seems unfair with the cost of building supplies.
It's a great question, Christine, and it's definitely been on the mind of myself and some of the other members of the long-term recovery group. So we are actively trying to investigate whether Big Creek has access to some of their graders and would be willing to do some grading in the mountains for folks who are milling on site, or if we can find additional graders through that resource. So the long-term recovery group is looking into that actively.
Thank you.
And it has been a point of discussion.
Okay, and I have one other thing too that is I know generic to every single person on this phone call, and that's the cost of building supplies. Now, the state of California has a surplus. In the past, when there's been big fires like the Paradise Fire, the state has helped in to do things like relax building requirements or something like that. In this case, I see no help so far, and with the extraordinary cost of building supplies and the state surplus, it seems like the people representing us should be doing something to help us get supplies. You know, everybody's underinsured because the building supplies are a factor of 3 higher. Is anything happening?
Great question, Christine. I think everybody is shocked by the cost of lumber and the cost of construction. I've heard between 30% and 200% or more the cost of materials. I was going to ask Valerie Brown from our long-term recovery group to talk about a few of the different strategies that we're trying to bring online to help folks that are underinsured and under-resourced with regards to rebuild. So it's a little bit broader than just material costs. But Valerie, could you talk a little bit about some of the things that the long-term recovery group is working on?
Yes, we're so there's a couple of resources that we're looking at. So we're working with National VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. So we're working with those partner agencies to bring in some volunteer rebuild resources that would be able to help people who were significantly underinsured or uninsured to be able to get them home. So those resources we'll be investigating those the end of this month. We've got other partners that will be able to help with some facets. Sorry, we've got dogs whining, ignore them. We've got some partners that'll have resources that can help with certain things. I know someone was talking about trees earlier on site. As Dave said, we're looking with some of those national partners to see if they can bring in grading equipment or they're actually looking at buying it themselves so that they have it, because there's a lot of lumber available. It's just getting that pipeline, as we all know. There are some other resources that are under other resources for building. So different technologies that we're looking at with some of those partners as well, to see what other options are available to be able to bring in different ways of different building materials and different ways of building that potentially are safer, but they're also more energy efficient and things like that. So we're looking at a lot of those different pieces that we're researching now to bring to the table to be able to share with people.
Okay, so what I hear though is next year. That's what I just heard you say. Is that correct?
No, we're talking next month.
Okay, awesome.
Yes, no, and there's, I mean, I know there's the idea of a building season here. We're not Canada, we're not Washington. We don't have the restrictions. One of the things that's on the table is we've got a group with building partners that's waiting for the Canadian border to open so that we can tap those volunteers, because they will come down all winter if we're able to have them set up in a camp.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christine, for asking those questions. They're very important questions for sure. I have Patrick as the next person with their hand raised.
Yeah, thanks so much for putting this on. I have a question that I think should be directed at Marilyn Underwood. I was just curious about the status of the hazard tree removal process. I asked because I have a couple of trees that were labeled with blue paint on my property, and it would be lovely to know if those are going to actually be removed or not.
Hi there. Gosh, it would be great, Patrick, to know what parcel. Maybe you could put it in the chat or something. I can follow up with you, because I think at this point, most of the hazard trees have been removed. But if you're saying you have some of those blue markings with a metal tag, they were supposed to have taken those down, the contractor to the state. So I can certainly follow up with the state on those. So if you don't mind putting your parcel in the chat, I can follow up.
Patrick, we don't have the chat enabled. I apologize. On the Zoom.
Sorry.
On this Zoom piece. That's again my fault. We have it on the Teams, but everybody seemed to hate Teams. But I did not do my homework on getting everything set up adequately for this.
Oh yeah, I can just email Marilyn. Thank you so much for the quick answer there.
Thanks, Patrick. Karen Vitale, you're the next one.
Hi, Dave. Yeah, I have a kind of a series of questions that leads us back to the debris flow. I think for the first one is it really possible to mitigate all debris flow risk to an acceptable level solely with modifications to the design of the structure? And if not, what the heck is the county going to do? Just tell us not to build?
So I can take that one. There are, as I noted earlier, when I spoke about this, the mitigation options would be either incorporated into the structure, or they may be offsite, such as an upslope retention structure, potentially in the drainage, a deflection wall. It really is a site-specific consideration, and it depends on how the debris flow will affect your particular property. And that's why this upcoming study is exciting to us, because it hopefully will refine what are conservative estimates of where the debris flow may go, in order to narrow the area where the debris flow may impact, so that folks could potentially site their structures in a location that would not be impacted, or in a location where you may be able to mitigate with upgrades to the foundation design. So yeah, it wouldn't solely be only the structure. It could be a combination of options, and it really depends on what comes out of the study and how it interacts with your particular property.
Okay, so at present, the WORT study has us smack dab in the middle of the debris flow zone for the acorns in Forest Springs. And we are basically on the house is sited on the original site of the house that burnt down, and we are sited on the only possible spot to build on that lot, and it is at the top edge. And it is at the extreme of right close to the street. There's nowhere else to put it. So, you know, it kind of gets back to that whole thing that Jessica was talking about for Forest Springs. It seems that, you know, a house in the middle of Forest Springs and individual units all putting up all sorts of stuff doesn't make sense. What makes sense is to mitigate it at the source at the top of Forest Springs. Has there been any consideration being made to doing something that collectively addresses the issues of the neighborhood? The whole neighborhood didn't burn down, just a few of us unfortunately did. And we're in a, but the whole neighborhood could potentially be at risk based on the work study.
And that's also part of the study, is to look at it as a community effort also, and to where as a, not specifically lot specific, but as a whole section of what would be required to help mitigate that. With that information, hopefully we can get with the long-term recovery advocates to find possible funding to construct that mitigation for that whole area of the community. First thing is helping the study produce where that would be best affected.
So it sounds like maybe in 100 years we can build our house. I just, how does this address people's real lives right now? We're out of our homes.
It's a great question, Karen. I think maybe I want to get to Amy Bach in just a minute, but maybe Paya, do you want to talk a little bit about the process that's currently underway in the meetings in August or perhaps early September that the board will have to discuss some of these aspects?
Sure. So thank you, Karen, and for saying exactly where you are. That helps me kind of visualize things. The very concerns you're talking about are the concerns that motivated the county to go out and find a supporter to do an area-wide investigation, because we could see that lot by lot was not going to address this for people. So David and his team found the community foundation. They were willing to fund it. So we have a group of engineers who specifically are experienced in fire-related debris flow doing a study of our area. They did the same thing in Montecito, and over time were able to narrow and narrow the zones to where fewer people were in that situation, because they could do more and more detailed work and be more precise. So what we could do as a first step was get that same team to start working here in our burn area. And so that's what this study is. And we expect that report from that study to be out mid-September. When that report comes out, that's when we have next steps. And as Dave alluded to, once we have that report out, we expect we're going to bring that report to the board and talk about, you know, what are the pathways? What are we trying to accomplish for people? What do we need to do now that we have this information? We're just that much more blind before we have the report. So we need to understand what is the situation, and then the board, the staff, the community, we will put our heads together and figure out what seems like the best solution. And we already know that in some drainages, the best solution is going to be off-site, not at the building areas, as you said. So that's when we put our resources together again, like we did to get the study, to see if we can get some kind of community or group mitigation going. But the first step is understanding the problem and describing the potential hazard, and that's what's underway now. So if that's helpful, David.
Thanks, Paya. Karen, let me get to a few more questions, and then maybe we may circle back again. I did want to take a second to recognize that the debris removal process for most all of you, I believe everybody in the county, has been completed. And there are some questions from folks. I spoke to some folks in Davenport this weekend that have questions about what happens next if you were part of the public debris removal process. So I wanted Amy Bach to come back on from the United Policyholders to talk a little bit about that process with respect to your insurance policies and how that works with the public option. And then we can circle back to the rest of the hands raised ideally.
Great. Thank you, Dave. So I'm going to share my screen again just for a quick second, because I think the county has really good information on this topic. Just give me a second here. So I just want to make sure folks are aware that the FAQs that are on the county website on debris removal and insurance are very clear, I think. And so what happens next is that if you had debris that wasn't eligible for, if you signed on with the public program and you had debris that wasn't eligible for that, and you paid separately to have that debris removed, or you are going to, and you would submit the bill for the non-public covered work to your insurer, and it should get honored immediately by your insurer. And as far as your insurer, I know some people are concerned that the insurers are, some insurers have said that they're going to hold back some of your benefits, waiting for the bill to come from the public program. And that, I think, gives some people concern because they want to kind of, the folks want to put their insurance claim behind them and just focus on rebuilding. And that's not feasible when you've got this piece hanging out there. The bottom line is that if, some policies have coverage that is earmarked for debris removal. Some policies have, don't specifically call it out as a separate bucket, and it gets calculated, the amount available to you gets calculated as a percentage of the insurance on your dwelling. And we, of course, are very aware that so many people are underinsured and need every dollar of their insurance money. However, if you participated in the public program and you signed the right of entry, you have given your insurance company and the county the ability to deal directly with each other and sort of work that out themselves, which in some ways is helpful for you. It's actually in a lot of ways helpful. So I guess what I really, the bottom line is, you should, if you have incurred costs and you have a bill, you have a payment, you get that to your insurance company right away, and they should issue payment in a timely manner, meaning within no later than 40 days. And then if they're dragging their feet, you can file a free request for assistance with the California Department of Insurance, and that cost should get reimbursed. But the bills for the public removal are probably not going to come for a while. And so my recommendation, our recommendation from United Policyholders is, as long as your insurance company is not withholding more than the amount of your debris removal coverage, then that piece is going to have to stay open for a while. And I think your county did the very best they could to put together a program that learned from some mistakes that other counties have made. And I did speak this morning with the head of the Consumer Services Bureau at the California Department of Insurance, talked to a little bit about the issue, and he assured me that anybody who files a complaint, and if you've incurred an expense and your insurer is not reimbursing you or is not committing to pay the bill, then they will process your claim and they will help you. So we're aware of this situation and the frustration, but I think it's kind of proceeding the way it's supposed to right now. And you just have to be patient, waiting for those bills to come. But I'm happy to answer any questions specifically.
Thanks, Amy. I think the only thing I would add to what Amy shared is that what Cal OES has told me and Marilyn Underwood, who's been in charge of the debris removal process as well, is that the state usually takes a minimum of 12 to 18 months to reconcile the bills and charges on a parcel by parcel basis for the county. And what they've alluded to a little bit with the fact that 2020 was the most destructive fire season in the state is that they would expect that that timeline might get a little bit longer. So just to give you a sense, it's not something that you're going to see anytime soon, but just to give you that scale and order of magnitude on that piece. There won't be, you know, the county won't be coming and seeking those funds from your insurance policy for some time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what the experience has been in Sonoma is, you know, the county, and I know your county's going to do the same, kept their word. They're not going to dun you for anything above what is available from your insurance that didn't go towards your rebuild. And that's, I think, the most important thing is, you know, that all the dollars that are available for your dwelling coverage should be paid to you as soon as you have established the reasonable replacement cost of your dwelling. And so if you didn't have a separate bucket for debris removal coverage, and it's in, your insurer should not be withholding anything from your dwelling settlement towards debris removal. And if it ends up that there's money left over, which of course for most of you there won't be, you really don't have to worry about it. But as Dave said, I mean, you're going to have to be patient. Those bills are not going to be coming for a while.
Thanks, Amy. I want to get back to the next hand. I do want to just give one piece of quick information for everybody about the lumber price that Christine brought up. So much like any commodity these days, the price of everything seems to be going up. The price of lumber actually peaked. So at a cost of 1,000 board feet, it peaked at nearly $1,700 per 1,000 board feet a few months back in May. It has decreased now to stabilize around $685 per 1,000 board feet. Now, that is still an astronomically high number relative to perhaps 2020 or 2019, but hopefully that trend will continue where we can stabilize and continue to bring that cost down. So just wanted to share that little piece of information for folks. The next person I have with the hand raised is Rebecca Hagan.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm just trying to get some transparency on the geological portion, and maybe that goes to Carolyn Burke. So the general study on the burn scar that they're doing for the debris flow aspect would be the GHA report, correct?
So the debris flow.
I just wanted to know if that's a GHA report because I'm kind of alluding to something else.
Yeah. So the
Okay.
study they're doing now is actually more than a geologic hazard assessment. So because the assessment wasn't necessary because we knew that the debris flow was present and needed investigation.
Got it. Perfect. Thanks. And I apologize. I'm just trying to be conscious of everybody's other questions. We get that done. And then the second part would be yes or no, you're required to have a full geological report. So I understand that, but I was told that everybody must have a geotechnical report, and that would be the soils report. And I just wanted to verify that for the audience so that they understand that as well, because I don't know if that was mentioned, and if it was, I apologize. Thank you for verifying that. Second of all, I wanted to see what was mentioned previously, once that report's finished, respectively mid-September, it will be placed before the board. What will be the turnaround for directives from the board's decision? What timeline are we looking at? Or do we have an SLA for that?
Paya, you can go ahead.
Sure. Really, I think that depends so much on what the content is of when that report gets completed. I don't think we can fully anticipate what it's going to say. If we could, you know, we wouldn't be needing it. So I think we have to assess that once the report is available to us.
Okay, fair enough. And then for our neighbors, I'm on the Clear Creek Road, so is my neighbor Kristen, who's on the call. Our homes were the last that were burned on the street, and there's a plethora of neighbors all the way down that have their homes. So once this is found, will these people receive the report information because they're just as much in the way as we are? And I would hope that that would be shared with neighbors who actually continually live on that street. Not sure you plan to do that.
Yeah, so this report would be shared publicly, and it will, as I noted, result in a risk map that will show that potential inundation areas, and absolutely it's very important for all your neighbors to see it, and it will be shared publicly.
Fantastic. I appreciate it because we get a lot of information and sometimes it's scary. And then I drive up and down that street to see my sick child on a regular basis. And I see my neighbors that live there every day. And I think about that and I just go, gosh, do they know all that's happening and all that? So I appreciate you trying to take steps in helping us. And it is quite expensive. The only reason, just speaking for most people, that we're in a hurry is that we are underinsured. In my case, and I'm sure a lot of other people, we're running out of money for rent. So we will in turn, have to look for other, because we have to pay house payments. And some people pay their houses off. Some people have no insurance. Some people owe money. In my case, my bank is holding the money that the insurance paid that I owe. And they want us to pay money. They want us to sign a letter saying they're not responsible for the remainder of the money. And then they want to do an inspection to prove that we've done some work so that they would consider giving us the money. So it's quite a rat race all the way around. So please be sympathetic to us when we get kind of short tempered or we have a bad day just because we've been run over by a Mack truck, so to speak. But I appreciate you making this time and thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we're running up against our time. We'll try and answer every question this evening to the best of our ability. But let's see if we can get through the last few hands here. Tracy Walker.
David, do you mind if I interrupt for just a moment?
Please.
Thank you. I realized I neglected to say something when I was responding to Karen and and to everyone. So you were talking about the difficulties of being in one of the hazard areas, and and we all know that when you have your geologic clearance done in that area, it comes back saying that you need to do more site-specific geologic investigation. And as we said, one of the hopes is that the report that's being completed by the Community Foundation grant helps with that, helps to address that report. But in the interim, even though that report is only weeks away, some people are telling us they're experiencing such hardship being off their properties that there is an option to defer the geologic report that you need to do until after you get your building permit. And I would be negligent if I didn't let you know that there's that option. Having said that, I would like to talk with everyone about that option for just a moment. We put that option in place because people requested it, and having that, being able to defer your report, we think can create all kinds of difficulties, and only you can decide whether that difficulty outweighs the difficulty of not being able to get onto your property or not being able to start building. But the process for that, we had hoped would be in place mid-July. It's, we're going to finish it in the next little bit. And what I want to say about that option is it's an option to defer your report to later, which means you get that information, whatever it is, after you've started construction of your house. You would be doing that at your own risk, so to speak. That means there are some conditions on opting for this exception. And one of them is that you would need to assume all the risks associated with having been given a building permit on a lot where you don't fully know what the risks are. You would have to assume any of those risks, indemnify the county against any liability in the future. That geologic report is still going to need to be done, and then there'll have to be disclosure of that information. And this agreement to assume risk and indemnify will be on title. So that will follow your property. And there are lots of things for you to consider about that. But if that seems like something that you want to pursue, the path would be to contact the Recovery Permit Center, and we would start talking with you about what the pros and cons are. Yeah, so the board put that in place, which is requesting an exception to the geologic hazard ordinance to defer your geologic report. So that's what you would be asking about, and we'll go from there. It's very individual what doing that would mean for you going forward. So that's why the first step is to just start a conversation with us. So thank you, David. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Paya. Tracy Walker, let's see. Let's try and get your question answered.
Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, thanks, Tracy.
Yes, one of my questions is, again, back to the geology. We had geology done in April, and Jeff Nolan, Jessica Grassi came out to the property and said that more extensive testing needed to be done, even though Charles from Sigma said that that was okay. My question is, we're in a low debris flow area. We're off of Rambling Road, which is off of Teal. And now we need to do like a 100-foot boring test. The problem is it's, 4 months out. And second of all, my other question is, the only reason we need to do this was because some of the retaining walls were missing. Yet I'm just kind of concerned about the other folks whose homes did make it, because
Next door
to us, there's no retaining walls there either. And the other question, that all pertains to the same thing is, we are required to have the GHA, yet some of the other parcels that are back in that area don't. I'm not quite sure how they determined that.
Hi, so thank you for your question. It's pretty sparse parcel specific, so I don't know that I can speak to those specifics. But I do know that, are you proposing an in-kind replacement of your home?
Yes, it's in kind within 10%.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can look into it more about the specifics, but due to the fact that it's parcel specific, I can't say. But I would recommend, once you have a geologic hazard clearance, and it gave you direction for a GHA or a geology report. Do you recall?
We already did the GHA, and they rejected it and told us we need to do a 100-foot boring now, which is going to take over 4 months to get somebody out to be able to do it. We had our original borings done in April. So that's going to be what, 6 months since our original borings to get the next one?
Yeah, so it sounds like
really excessive.
And it sounds like you're already contracted with a geologist at Sigma Prime. So maybe if your geologist can get in contact with Jeff Nolan, maybe they can discuss the discrepancy that they see.
They met up at our property a couple weeks ago. That's when we were told we had to do the 100-foot boring. Jeff told him that.
Okay.
While he was at the property with him.
Yeah, so it seems pretty parcel specific. And Dave, I don't know if we need to get through some more folks, but I would say definitely we can talk with Jeff. I hesitate to, for the reasons mentioned in Paya, what Paya just said, that I would hesitate to have you put that off, defer the geologic report, because it is important that any mitigations are factored into your design. But that would be, I know that it can be difficult getting drill rigs, and the geologists are trying to work with each other to coordinate those. But I'm sorry that it's taking so long for that drilling to take place.
Tracy, because I failed to activate the chat, and I apologize. I just put my email address as my name. I know you've been probably talking maybe directly via email with Jeff Nolan, but Carolyn and I can follow up if you want to go ahead and email me, and we can try and work on this very, like Carolyn said, parcel specific issue for you, and just try and understand it a little bit better and see if we can get some clarity for you.
Also, is that the whole big study happening? Is that through all of the burn area, or is it just up in like Fallen Leaf 236 kind of area? Because we're up in Riverside Grove. We're kind of far away from all them. Does that pertain to us too?
No, that study is specific to the debris flow hazard because it was a common hazard that was throughout the CZU burn area. Unfortunately, for site-specific geologic reports, it is not possible to do a generalized report for those.
Because most of our neighborhood burn.
Yeah, so there, if you want to just get some clarity as to the extent, and this is just for everybody's benefit, you can go onto the county's GIS website. Okay. And if you go onto that website, under the layers, there's a geologic hazards layer, and you can click to open up the legend and the number of different layers in there. And there's actually a layer that is basically the extent of the WERT study. And it's a brown, it comes up as a brown layer when you turn it on. And okay, what we're trying to do is concentrate that study in most of the basins that had debris flow risk identified through that WERT study. But if there's any further questions, Tracy, that you guys have, feel free to email me and I can try and answer those questions as to kind of if you're included in the extent. So it's not the entire burn area, as Carolyn said, but it's focused in these drainages like Clear Creek, the Acorns, Fallen Leaf, and others down the San Lorenzo Valley, and then also in the Scott Creek drainage off of Swan Road.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That answers the question.
I think it's Arnie and Bobo.
Yeah, it's Amy and Bodo. Actually, we met at the Last Chance meeting. We are members of the Last Chance community. We live on South Pine. And I'm wondering whether there has any progress been made there. And you mentioned earlier that you have a meeting this week with CAL FIRE. Where is Last Chance, particularly South Pine, in terms of the geological survey and the debris flow? And then another question is, we are underinsured as well, and the insurance company is breathing down our necks, so we have to have some statement from somewhere that this process is going on, that we are involved, but it's not time for us to hire either an architect or a contractor. And then the last one is a question about how far behind on appointment is the recovery center, because on July 2nd, we sent an email to have a meeting set up and we haven't heard back yet.
So let me see if I can answer a couple or identify a couple. So the first question on the geologic hazard assessment, certainly the North Pine and South Pine folks like yourselves will need to have that geologic hazard assessment. North Pine and South Pine are not identified as being in a debris flow hazard area. So the study, they are not. So the study will not, the outcomes of the study will not help define your geologic hazard. So that will be independent of that piece. The second question on the insurance piece, I don't know if Marcus or Amy have experience on what types of documentation. I think Marcus from the Recovery Permit Center is familiar with submitting letters to insurance agents to document the process and the timeline. Is that accurate, Marcus?
Yeah, I changed my handle to my email address. If you could email me your parcel address, your guys's, whoever the policyholders is information, and we can do kind of a letter for the insurance company as kind of the status of the county and where everything's going, to help possibly have some time extensions. We have done some of those type of letters.
Yeah. We called your office today, so somebody is looking into our parcel because there's also now a new question about whether was it originally legal or not. And hopefully we get an appointment with you and then maybe we can discuss the letter. Yeah?
Okay, yeah. If you want to email me, I can set up an appointment with you.
And Dave, that should be adequate. A letter from the county. It doesn't have to be in a specific format.
Thanks, Amy. And then Amy and Bobo, or Bodo, there was another question. There's a third question, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten it at this point.
Yeah, I forgot it too. It had to do with the geology on South Pine. What do we need to do there?
I think the best thing to do is to have that conversation with Marcus and his team at the Recovery Permit Center, and they're going to be able to give you a sense. It may be that you need a geologic hazard assessment done for the property, and that might be the first step with regards to that piece.
And even for a short term, like a trailer or something, we need some septic. What is the requirement for septics up there on South Pine? Before we had an old redwood tank, that's obviously not to go again. What do we have to, what are we looking at providing for septic?
For a temporary, when we do find redwood tanks, part of the OTS manual is where the state requires us to have them mitigated. So possibly a tank replacement could solve that problem of the connection for a temporary permit scenario. But I'd have to pull up your records to see exactly what you got going. Kind of on a larger scale for your property. But I can, if you guys are available tomorrow, I can definitely set something up with you guys so we can kind of go through all the ins and outs.
Yeah, it would be nice to come in and discuss it with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Jen, I don't know if all three of you, Jennifer, Christine, and Rebecca, still have questions. Chris, why don't we go to Christine, and then Jennifer, and then Rebecca.
Okay, I'll be quick. So as was common through the mountains, the people that cleared off my property destroyed the road, Kings Highway. Now I downloaded a form to fill out to send in. I haven't sent it in yet because every single person I've talked to who sent it in has had it rejected. Is there somebody helping us send in the right information in order to get our roads, and some of these are public roads, fixed?
Great question. So I am aware of about approximately a little over 50 damage claims that have been submitted. I weekly check in with Cal OES on the number of claims submitted, the number pending, and the number rejected. The county is also working to try and get some of those public roads and the damage associated with the debris removal fixed as well. Feel free to email me with your information. I do recommend everybody, as soon as you can, if you have any damage that you believe should be fixed by the debris removal contractors, we do need to get those damage waivers submitted as quickly as possible. They are wrapping up the debris removal process, and so we want to get those in before they're completely out of the county. But I am working with Cal OES, Cal Recycle, and Anvil to address these issues. This is the first state contract where the language was included that they needed to repair roads. So we're actively engaged in trying to hold them to that requirement. There was approximately 10% retainer on that statewide contract for debris removal, and we want to see them spend some of that money to fix roads. So it's definitely on my radar. It's on your state representative's radar, and we're trying to work on that. So please do submit that, and you can email me and I can try and follow up with Cal OES on that.
Okay, I can't see your whole email address. Can you say it out loud?
Absolutely. It's david.reed. That's the hard part, R-E-I-D. And then it's at santacruzcounty.us, all spelled out, santacruzcounty.us. Thanks, Christine. Jennifer.
Hello. So I had a quick question about when you receive your permits after you've gotten your pre-clearance and you're getting ready to build. If you don't get your permits cleared before September, October, are you able to start your foundations and your driveway needed for your build? Is there like a digging deadline that we are going to be held to?
No, there's usually a winter moratorium on grading, but most of these properties are under the requirement for grading permits. So we will allow them to be dug and continue on through the winter time.
So is that the same with foundations as well? Because I'm sure that everybody's having the same issue where all the engineer folks are way behind schedule and logs, so they're a couple weeks out still. So foundation work and driveway work won't be put on pause because of a moratorium of the county or the city.
Correct. They fall under that same exemption.
Yeah, so there's a threshold. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carolyn. It's like 500 cubic yards or something to that order of magnitude. That if you're under that, right, you don't need it, or is it much less than that?
It's 100 cubic yards.
100. Thank you. So yeah, so to Marcus's point, most foundations, most driveways don't get close to needing to remove or move that much soil as part of their foundation or driveway work. So that's why you're under that threshold.
Yeah, we haven't been tagging the cubic yards to create a foundation as part of that threshold.
So if you're over the threshold, are they going to say you can still do your digging after whatever the moratorium would be, or are they just completely throwing that out the window?
That would kind of come more on a case by case, depending on the complete extent of the grading. In some cases, we might put I don't say a moratorium, but a hold maybe on certain cuts and fills that may be really large or real small during the middle of, or real large during the during that raining period. Well, like I said, I haven't seen any currently have come through that would even get pushed into getting a grading permit at all. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Rebecca, you still have your hand raised. Was there another question that you wanted to ask?
Yes, I was wondering, would it make sense to go ahead and apply and fill out the form for geological deferment? In our case, we have a geologist hired to do a full geological report. We've just identified a geotechnic engineer, and with all intention of moving forward, we're just trying to get through the pre-application process. And like everybody said, it's a long wait. So what I would try to do this in tandem. Would you suggest that? That way we get the deferral going, but all knowingly we are going full bore with the geological until we can't. And that report will be very revealing. It's going to tell us whether we can do it or not, because that may supersede all the money we have. So that's why we're trying to move forward, just to see if it's a possibility. Also, realistically, you can apply for SBA loan. I was approved for it and then just recently declined because they realized that I received some insurance. But I wanted to let people know that if I collectively get the geological report, geotechnical report, and a design for a foundation, and then come up with plans for a house and submit that to SBA, I can show them that it costs more than $200,000 to build a house in California. So if it's not too scary on those geological reports, which I am afraid of, I'm hoping to kind of get that done. So the question is, yes or no, would you suggest to go ahead and do the deferment, knowing that I'm going to go ahead and get those reports? I'm just trying to do it in tandem to save time.
Yeah.
Because I'm pre-application right now.
I think you said a couple of really wise things. And one is that report's going to come out and it's going to give you information that you're going to use to make a decision. And that's what they're for. And so you said, yes or no, do we recommend that? And I will tell you that the county's experts are county geologists, very experienced in both this kind of geologic process and in the Santa Cruz Mountains, decades practicing as a licensed engineering geologist, has made a recommendation that you need that report. before you can know what the risk is. And so we do not recommend going forward without that information. And so there is this process, but we don't recommend it. And our recommendation is that you get your report, and you then know what your situation is, and then you can decide what you can live with and what you can't live with, and what you wish to invest in, and what you I'm not in your shoes, so only you can make that decision. But the county's recommendation is not to defer.
Right, and just to restate, it would not be on our particular instance that we would defer to just write it off. We would just defer to get the process started so we can get through pre-application, because it's going to take a while to get all the reports back.
Right.
I don't mean the one that the county's doing. I'm talking about the one that we're paying for.
Yeah, I think I understood that. And
yeah,
basically, I think what you'd have to do is decide whether you're willing to cloud your title and take on the legal document that assumes risk, indemnifies the county, and discloses the lack of information. There are going to be there's going to be some impact of that. I can't tell you what it is. You'd have to speak to a realtor, a financial person, et cetera. But there are some risks there too. So, that's what you'll need to think about. I don't think it's as simple as saying, I can get two things done at once. Why wouldn't I do that? The reason is that
right.
there
No,
are some consequences.
I'm glad I
for going with
asked.
the deferral.
I'm definitely glad I asked, because if it's going to be something where it's recorded and then it becomes a hassle to take it off once you put it on, then you might as well not do it, right?
Only you can decide. What I can tell you is it would need to be recorded on title.
Okay.
The only other thing I would say, Rebecca, is I have been talking with Kristen, your neighbor on Clear Creek, and I do want to get together another neighborhood meeting with folks out there to talk about all of these things, as well as the access to your properties, or many of your properties across the creek that are requiring bridges and whatnot. So stay tuned. I definitely want to get together with all of you and talk a little bit more about that, and try and help find solutions where we can. So that question spurred 3 more questions. I know we're almost at 2 hours. Let's see if we can get through these quickly. Mike, and then Annie, and then Antonia.
Yeah, thank you. Very quick question. We're actively working on rebuilding smaller than what we had before. Assuming all this goes through, what is going to happen to our property taxes?
Good question. We don't have one of our assessor's office folks on here right now, but I will share a general answer that applies to everyone. So it won't be specific to the reduction in square footage, but just so that everybody knows, whatever your assessed value was before the fire, if you rebuild in kind within that certain percentage range, your assessed value will stay the same. So in most cases, if you didn't go through this tragedy and you were to demolish your home and rebuild it, you would be assessed at the new value of that new construction. But in this case, because of the calamity, you will always be assessed at that lower rate. So I think you're fine in the sense that you're not going to trigger a reassessment, and I couldn't give you a complete answer on that. But if you want to email me, I can certainly put you in contact with the assessor's office.
Thank you. That's it.
Ann Black. You're muted still, Ann. Sorry.
Yeah, so I missed the beginning part of the meeting, and there's a couple things that were said.
Stop touching. Only look at.
Sorry, I'm not sure who that is.
Can you take the next question first, please?
Oh, that's on your side.
Yeah.
Antonia, did you have a quick question?
I did. I don't understand why we have to record something on a deed that the risk goes down according to your science over time. Why would we have to record something of permanence on our property when it's not, it's something that ends, right? And I just, again, I want to make sure, I want to kind of get an understanding of how this survey is being done because Dave, as you know, our neighborhood is seen as a low debris flow risk, just from the basic WORT study. In addition to that, you know, you went on that hike where you saw the land above our land was ground burn only. So based on all the science that the county has repeatedly presented to us, that shows us that the risk is even lower. And so I want to make sure that there's actually boots on the ground where people are actually going to survey and they're not just taking in historic mudslides and all this stuff. And I want to make sure that it's actually fire related, because that's, you know, this is specific to me, of course, but I know that it's an issue across the board with other fire families where non-fire related stuff is being shoved down our throats. When we bought the house, you know, these other things were already a part of the topography that did not change at all. So to hone in my question, one, why does the debris flow study have to be put on our deed if the risk goes down and then goes away over time? And then second, if this is non-fire related stuff, like is that something we would have to record on our deed if we did walk that path to waiver? And that would seem like a really unfair decision.
They're great questions. I think Antonia and everybody, you know, this is a critical piece as you and others have raised. And I think as Paya articulated, the board is engaged. Supervisor McPherson, J.M. Brown from Supervisor McPherson's office, and Supervisor Coonerty and his staff are engaged in this conversation. They're aware that this issue is coming up for all of you, and they look forward to having a board conversation when they have more information and can make a more informed decision about what best to do next. So your elected representatives are listening to you. Bruce has been on this whole time, and as well as JM. And I think that there are conversations that are going to be had. I think my recommendation, you know, for folks is that any important conversation like this by the decision makers that you have elected, we want them to make those decisions with as much pertinent information as they can, so that they understand and that you understand the full magnitude of what's being considered. So those conversations are happening. I know for all of you, it's not happening fast enough. And we are trying to address things in the near term with temporary occupancy to the best of our ability. And as Paya said, there is an avenue for those who want to defer the geologic report until after the building permit issuance. And that may afford you some time to have this conversation unfold with the board staff, with the board rather. But it's complicated. I know, Antonia, we've talked, and I've talked with many others. Carolyn and I have had many long conversations with neighborhoods, and there's no easy, quick answer to this. A lot of it, as Carolyn said, is site specific. So there's more conversation to be had. I want to try and respect everybody's time, and I want to just wrap up with a couple key pieces of information as a reminder. First and foremost, I do apologize that I didn't recognize the limit of this meeting, so I am going to get it posted as quickly as possible, hopefully tomorrow, as well as the slide deck from this evening's presentation, because there was a lot of good information and complex information to absorb during the presentation. So I will get that stuff up on our OR3 website as soon as possible, hopefully tomorrow or Wednesday. I do want to remind folks that the long-term recovery group is a resource for you on many, many different levels. A simple one as an example is there are resources that the long-term recovery group identified to help you with site plans. So for some of you who don't have your site plan designed yet, there's an online resource that the long-term recovery group has gotten a discount for that can help you with your site plan. But the only way we can help connect you with more resources, as Valerie articulated, is just to connect with the long-term recovery group. And they might not be able to help you. You might be on your path and be self-sufficient. But the only way we can connect you to those resources is through connecting with the long-term recovery group. So I hope you take an opportunity to find out about that. Again, that website is hosted on our OR3 website at the county. There's a link to the long-term recovery group, and you can find much of the information that Valerie articulated in the meeting tonight. So again, if you have other questions or want to have further conversation with me or other members of the county, please feel free to email me, david.reed@santacruzcounty.us, and we'll do our best to continue to help you. I know that this has been a hard process for all of you. You're anxious to get started and get back on your properties. And we do really empathize with everybody and want to do our best to get you back in one form or another, temporarily and then ideally permanently, as quickly as we can. So with that, I know it's been a long night. Thank you all for sticking around. Thank you, staff, for sticking around, and we look forward to talking with you some more. Take care, everyone.